should disclose that my wife Marcella works at Twitter at the same time, and she's still also in court with you, so all of what we didn't. But I can say no. John, so I was there. All that does is give you beginning of 2017. Yeah. U.S. sales and minority sales. Kind of from the start of when we launched the first products. Right around when I was with Richard Alfonsi. Oh, okay. So it was mid-March.
Yeah, just one quick question. Do you guys care about the order?
I don't care what the
Or you sit? All right, we'll do it this way then. Unless you guys can change that up if you want.
And I may talk about some of the history in my introduction, actually, if that's okay with you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool.
In case we need something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good.
So Chris, I don't know if you remember, I visited Ganip. So it was after Twitter acquired Ganip, and you were like, I was talking to you mostly about moving to Boulder at the time.
Oh, is that right? That whole period, John, was such a blur.
I know.
It's amazing. I think I've literally lost years of my life that I can't really remember. I was just saying, it was just complete chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
It did, and it did not stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it was always varying degrees of chaos. It wasn't.
Yeah. I think you're.
Yeah, I
doing
was just
a
trying to
good-
put
Yeah,
stuff
I do
somewhere
too.
where it's not in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, and you all are pros at this, but it's heated.
Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs, and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Ready? All right, welcome everybody. Let's get started here. So, good morning from Boulder, Colorado. It's a beautiful day today. So today is Thursday, April 10th, 2025. It's 9 a.m. and this is panel 18157. In this session, we're going to be talking about X-pocalypse, the fragility of digital public spaces, what happens when a billionaire buys the digital town square. And we'll end at 10:10 a.m. So I give another welcome to everyone attending live here in the west side of the Glenn Miller Ballroom on the CU Boulder campus, and to everyone around the world watching us via the live stream. We're glad you're here today. So social media, digital public spaces is a major part of our conversation. So of course, please do share your experience on social media platform of choice, whether it's owned by a billionaire or not, with the hashtag CWA Boulder. Before we get started here, I'd like to read the University of Colorado Boulder Land Acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, faculty, and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So a panel on social media, digital public spaces is just like social media itself. It's best when it's two-way, so we want to hear from you. So here's how we'll handle Q&A today. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for that Q&A. We're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. At any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers, who are over here. So please write legibly, and if you're a student, please note this on the question of your card. When you finish, raise your hand, hand it to the producer, who will bring it up to me, and I urge everyone to make their questions brief and to the point. So quickly about me, then I want to get to our panel here, but my name is Matt Duncan. I'm the Brand Listening Program Director here at CU Boulder. I've worked in social media for around 17 years, and I'm 6 years into teaching a dedicated class on social listening, social intelligence in the Advertising, Public Relations, Media Design Department of the College of Media, Communication, and Information. It's one of the last times we could say the communication because it's changing to design this summer. My students should be in attendance here or online, and this year I'm also honored to be in the Social Intelligence Insider 50 class of 2025. So a few weeks back, I ordered this t-shirt that I was really, really excited about. Not this one, another one. I was then asked to be moderator of this panel, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect alignment of the stars here. You may have heard about this t-shirt. I know some of our panelists probably have. It was a t-shirt originally worn by Blue Sky CEO Jay Graber at the recent South by Southwest reading, and I'm not going to read, it was in Latin, but I'm not going to embarrass myself with the Latin part, but it said, "A world without Caesars," which is a big tease about Mark Zuckerberg wearing a shirt saying, again in Latin, but it was either Zuck or nothing, right? So I thought it was kind of fitting for what we're about to talk about here. So unfortunately, the stars of the shipping has not aligned, and I didn't get it before the panel. So I wore another panel that's, or another t-shirt that's relevant here of a bike. And that's one thing we all do commonly share when we're not talking about social media, digital spaces, or the companies we work for, is we all love cycling. So a common bond there. So it worked out okay. All right, so enough about me, because we want to get to everyone here. So how this is going to work. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and we'll get into discussion, all that. So all the panelists are awesome humans doing many awesome things to list. So I will briefly introduce each one of them with a portion of their About section on their LinkedIn profile. They didn't know this part. So panelists, if your LinkedIn profile is outdated, I offer the same guidance I give my students to strongly consider keeping your entire digital story current. These guys are really good at that, so there's really no issue with that part. But I will also add a couple quick, interesting finds from the interweb. Full bios are on the CWA app and the website, so you could read all about these awesome people here. So another common bond, everyone up here but me, at one point in their career had an employee badge with a blue bird on it that you likely will recognize. So I'll let them talk about it or not talk about it as we go forward, but it's another one of the common things here. So, all right, without further ado, right next to me is Chris Moody. So. Fun fact here, I shared the stage with Chris back in 2017 for another CWA panel, and that one was called The Self and Selfie, Identity in the Social Media Age. So I may bring that back here at some certain point here. So LinkedIn, Chris doesn't have a LinkedIn About Me section. So, okay, he has a LinkedIn page if you want to go follow him and all that, but no About. So I went to his blog, And from this, my name is Chris Moody, but everyone just calls me Moody. I've been working in technology for more than 25 years, and I've learned a ton along the way. Probably the biggest takeaway from my career so far is to not take myself too seriously. I've been damn lucky in my life. Another cool thing you should check out about Chris is in 2016, he gave the commencement address at his alma mater, Auburn. Sorry about the tournament here, but we won't talk about that. A couple of tidbits from that I thought were awesome. When people say something is too hard to you, more times than not, they're bringing you right at an opportunity for you to go out and make an impact and make a difference. Another part from that, I've gone out and worked with thousands of people, and I'm here to tell you that 99.9% of them are filled with good. Sometimes you just have to dig a little bit to find the goodness. And so now when I approach people, I look for the best in them, and I assume that I can trust them, and I don't know if it'll work out for you, but I can tell you for me, it leads to a far more fun, interesting, and productive place. So Chris is a good guy. Next to Chris is John Ploumitsakos.
Got it.
All right. Whew, I was nervous about that. So from LinkedIn, John does have a part on here. I pulled out with over 20 years of professional experience spanning entrepreneurship, technology, law, and academia. John bridges the gap between theory and practice. There's also another great video of John from a few years back where he's talking about mobile tech. But I decided to not pull from that video and do what all of his students would do learning about John and go to ratemyprofessors.com. I just pulled a couple of them. They're all glowing. So John is my favorite teacher at Leeds. He cares so much about his students and wants everyone to succeed. He is so knowledgeable about sales, and this really made me love his class. He made class interesting, connected to real-life experience with his own company, and he created a really positive atmosphere. If you put in genuine effort, you'll do well in his class, and he's always available to talk about anything business outside of class time. So hopefully you're starting to notice a theme about the people that are joining me here today. And on the far end here is Amir Shevat. And I think you came up from Austin?
Yes.
Joined us from Austin here today. So from LinkedIn, author of Designing Bots by O'Reilly, experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in platform companies, builds developers, ecosystems, products, and platform partnerships around the world, engineer by birth. And on that note, Amir, congratulations on release 4.9. He just released last week, I think? Last week, yes. So you can kind of figure out what we're talking about here. But in the release notes, conditions apply, crashes and bugs may still occur. Amir 5.x roadmap is still TBD. We still don't have a clear plan for a mature product. So Amir, I'm halfway through the 5 series, so it's pretty good. So hopefully it's good for you too. So in a recent, I'll get off on this and they all can talk this last part here, but in a recent interview with Michael Eisenberg, Amir shares some many awesome t-shirt worthy points in himself, some for today. What does it mean to win? And I think that's relevant to what we're going to be talking about here. If you have the imposter syndrome all the time, that is a signal that you're in the right place. And I have it big time up here, so I guess I'm in the right place. If you want to really deeply understand the other side, try to do it. That was a former friend of his, giving him some guidance on what he'll talk about with his career here. Figure out one hard thing with the founder you're working with, which I thought was cool. Then this is Amir saying, I deeply believe in helping others, and I think companies helping each other, even without the investor, is even better. So hopefully you heard the common theme of why I'm trying to tee this up for what we're going to talk about here for the next hour or so. So with that, let's get into this with enough of me talking. So each panelist right now will take about 3 to 5 minutes to give their opening remarks, and we're going to start here with Chris.
Thanks for that. You guys hear me okay? Thanks for that awesome introduction, Matt. I'm curious just from the mindset of the people in the room, how many people would say they have some fear, anxiety, or frustration with social media? Okay, good. So I think it'd be worth talking about one very biased view of what I think were 2 fundamental things that happen to lead to everybody raising their hand that I don't think are talked about enough, and I just think it's interesting to go back and relive the last 15 years and say, how did we get here? And I think there were kind of 2 really interesting moments. So when I should say I'm personal friends with some of the founders of many of the social networks, and I would say I don't think any of them started their businesses or their products because they wanted to destroy communications and trust and all these other things. I think they wanted to build mostly cool utilities. I think cool would have been a frequently used word. And in the early days, if you think of the early days of the first scaled social platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they really were mostly utilities. They were about communicating pretty basic information. Facebook was about sharing pictures with friends and family, and And Twitter was about basically keeping track of people that you were friends with or people that you wanted to be friends with, and them sharing a lot of basic information. And I think one shift that happened, and it probably started happening around 2012, I would say, is that the type of content that was shared started to veer much less away from what and much more towards what I would consider, and I think we talked about this back in 2017 in the Self and Selfie, started to be more about self-expression. And so you started to have the notion of creators, and these creators were expressing their creativity through these platforms. And one of the first platforms that had that was Vine, a platform that was ultimately bought by Twitter. And then Instagram really took what Vine was doing and put it on steroids, and then later TikTok and YouTube, as YouTube really evolved into a social network. It became about expressing yourself, and expressing yourself could be, fun, creative things. It could be, hey, here's just my, rant or opinion on this. But I think it really shifted the intent of a lot of these platforms from being more factual to be more opinion-based. I think the other thing that shifted, and John was in the ad sales business, so he can choose to talk about this more or not. But at some point, these platforms had to decide how are they going to make money, and the choice that pretty much they made exclusively was to monetize through advertising, which was a very logical choice because, for 100 years in this country, if you had a large audience and you had content, the way you monetized that was through advertising. So they did the logical thing and basically said, we're going to be media companies and we're going to sell advertising. And then through that process, Wall Street said, hey, we need to figure out how we're going to value these companies. And besides just the straight metrics of revenue and profit. And they said, look, we think if you're an advertising platform, advertisers are going to lean in if you have something called engagement. And so these platforms started reporting on their engagement numbers, which is different. So if they'd gone a membership model, it would have been, well, how many members are paying for your service? And it would have been that simple. But they said, we're going to do advertising. They're like, well, if advertisers are going to get results, then you have to have not just people that have an ID on your platform. They have to be heavily engaged. And so as part of building up the advertising business, these platforms started building algorithms to get people more engaged. And that was really driven, I can't speak for all the platforms, I can certainly speak for Twitter. That was really driven by a desire to generate revenue advertising. And the algorithms, I do not believe, at least again in the case of Twitter, were designed to be biased. The reality is it's impossible to build algorithms without bias, I believe. But the intent was, hey, let's train these computers that if somebody's looking at a particular piece of content and they engage with it, then let's serve up more of that content. And that obviously spun up into lots of areas, and probably any of us that have used social network realize that once you click on something and potentially are interested in it, even if it's a one-off, you're very likely to get that content over and over again. And so when you take the combination of you have people expressing a lot more creativity and ideas, much less probably about facts and more of opinions, combined with algorithms that are designed to pull you in to the ideas that resonate with you, then you get echo chambers. And I think that's what we have broadly seen across all the platforms, is that you end up getting a lot of people following people that think like them and produce content that resonates with them. And I think you get these stronger and stronger echo chambers where it seems like anybody that is not in your echo chamber is likely crazy. And so I wanted to highlight that because I don't think where we ended up was done on purpose. I actually think it was a complete accident, and those are just two kind of pivotal moments along the journey.
John, you're up.
Thanks, Moody. Yeah, I guess I'd like to start with this notion of the digital town square. I feel like we hear this a lot. And really, I tried to do a little bit of searching as to where this came from. It seems around 2015, it came up. I don't remember who said it first, but eventually everyone said it. Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, the Supreme Court, and Justice Kennedy, I think it was in 2017, sort of set it in the context of First Amendment case. But to me, I think this analogy isn't quite right. And so I was trying to think of a good example for why it's a little bit off. And it's, bear with me here. So I think thinking back to about a year ago, I took my kids, they're now 6 and 8, so, or 6 and 9, so they would have been 5 and 8 at the time, to Manhattan for the first time. And they had seen Times Square in movies, TV shows, and kind of knew what it was. But when we get out of the subway at Times Square, it was, for anyone who's been to Times Square, it was the typical chaos, right? Tons of people on the streets, sort of helicoptering selfie sticks from tourists, the Gucci bags, all that stuff, and then a lot of billboards and noise. So my 8-year-old daughter at the time says, you know, this doesn't seem real. And my 6-year-old daughter just covers her ears and says, too loud, too loud. And in a way, that's kind of, I think, a better analogy for what social media is than this notion of the sort of Norman Rockwell town square, right? It's almost like a little bit of a parody where, is it a square? Yes. Does it have these notions of like a democratic, marketplace of ideas? Maybe. But more than anything, it's almost like a Potemkin village or something. It sort of looks like it on the outside. It's got the same model, but because of how the incentives of really any modern social platform are structured, and Chris talked about this a second ago, it's really not this open dialogue where everyone has an equal voice. Everyone has a voice, and that is a good thing about the opportunity of social media. But this notion of engagement and sort of how the platforms make money is at root as to what I think is a problem with the analogy, right? This is, they are private companies. The topic here is maybe what happens when a billionaire acquires the town square, but the reality is I don't know that it matters how much money someone has that acquired or owns the platform. It's the fact that they are private actors and they have private capitalistic incentives, right? So before Elon, it was, I don't know who the majority stakeholders were in Twitter, but some combination of Vanguard, BlackRock, Jack Dorsey, if not billionaires, very wealthy people before Elon came along. So I do think that's always been there, but I think the bigger problem is with the pressure to monetize behavior on these platforms, you have this this notion of engagement, which is at the root of how the systems operate, right? So it's not necessarily a platform or a town square where there's this open and equal exchange of ideas. The platform itself, the square, is really like kind of based on this like billboard logic and almost like a casino psychology, right? Where they need people staying in the square. They need the people who are talking the loudest and getting the attention of the most other people to be highlighted regardless of like what the content of that speech is. So I think that is at the root of some of the issues with the analogy. Now, what does it mean going forward, I guess, and how do we fix this? I don't know that there's any, clear way that necessarily works with the advertising model, or at least the advertising model that we have for most of the platforms today. I think it is easy, and probably all too easy, to kind of use the First Amendment as this sort of right for a certain kind of behavior or another. I mean, the reality is the First Amendment was intended to protect against government overreach, and it was almost a shield that is now being used as a sword and a justification for allowing certain kinds of speech that really is, in a sense, self-serving for the platforms themselves. So I guess the way I think about it going forward is there another model? Is there a way to make money on these platforms that is not the advertising model that's in place today? Are there some sort of private public partnerships that could make these these platforms more like a town square and an open exchange of ideas. I don't know if they're nonprofits. I am not a finance person, so I don't know what the financial incentives would have to look like for this to work. And I think Amir and Chris could probably speak a lot better than I can to that. I do think, as far as the town square goes, though, a couple things to keep in mind. One, I don't know that the town square that we imagine from, Norman Rockwell paintings, or I remember when I was at Twitter and we were kind of going through the whole IPO thing, the CEO at the time referred to Twitter as sort of the modern agora from ancient Athens. And I think, forget the problems with the analogy. I don't know that those places were necessarily the open and free exchange of ideas that we kind of think of them as sometimes in stories and things like that. I mean, they had their own issues with limits to who could participate and things like that. So I think going forward, as far as like the town square and some version of democracy goes, it's really this notion, I think it was John Lewis who said, democracy is not really a state, it is an act or a way of acting. And I think whatever we could do with these platforms to make it less about, is it a square, is it a forum, and more about, in the digital world, what does the design enable in terms of fair and open and transparent action? I think that's at the crux of where we go. So I'll end it there, and I'll turn it over to Amir.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all. I heard that like the 9 a.m. session are usually like when the students are asleep. So thank you for coming. And thank you, Matt, for listening to that podcast and writing the content. I spent most of my career on social networks to some degree. When I joined Google, 2 months after I joined Google, we got the bonus from Google Plus because we won over Facebook. If you remember Google Plus, that was a network that went up and then completely crashed. And I think I still have my Google Plus account, but it doesn't count anymore. Then I went to look at social interactions in enterprises and worked at Slack and created experiences in social in companies and saw things. I think it's all about incentives. So for example, there's no toxicity in Slack because everybody knows your name and your manager could see what you're doing. So there's a lot of interest. I always look at things from an aspect of what is the incentives? What drives me to do something? What stops me from doing something? And then I went to work for Twitch. Twitch is a network for streamers. So if you're young enough and like play games, you can play your video game and make a lot of money on Twitch, having a community of people. And the incentive there was that people that were broadcasting on Twitch were making up to $16 million a year playing their favorite games. So again, somewhat toxic network, but it's toxic because games are toxic. So people shit talk and stuff like that. And that's okay, and that's expected, and that's not bad, that's not apocalyptic. And then I sold my own company to Twitter. So Jack Dorsey gave me a very strong incentive. He said, like, I'm buying your company to open up Twitter. I want the API to expose everything, and I want researchers to be able to see everything on Twitter, and I want all the data of Twitter to be open. I did the cardinal sin. He talked about the cardinal sin of selling out to ads. And he said, like, ads are the misincentives of the system. And right now, I want you to take a business that is almost $500 million of selling Twitter data and turn it into an open platform. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's amazing incentive. What I found out is that even if Jack wanted that, that was not the case all over Twitter. A lot of people, including the market, wanted Twitter to make money. So the incentive was, we had a duality. On one side, we wanted to make a lot of money. On the other side, we wanted to be open. You cannot do the same. If you give something for free, you can't charge for it, right? That's a basic rule of life. And I was told to do both. So that was like, if you look at incentives, you can understand. And I think that the same thing goes with ads. The ads turn product managers into thinking not about how can I delight the user, they're turning it into how can I make that user stay the longest. They're measured by the wrong thing. Like, I never get Spotify to bug me to come back and listen to another song. Why? Because the incentives are aligned. I pay for Spotify, and Spotify, I use it when I want, not when Spotify wants. But when the incentives are if I had ads supported on Spotify, all it said is like, hey, there's a new song. Here's a song that will make you mad that you will listen to other songs, and the entire incentive system breaks. And I'll finish the story with, and then Elon came with the sync, if you remember. And he was my direct manager for 2 weeks, something I would not wish on anyone. And his incentives were unclear. And most of the time that I talked to him, I had a feeling that he was either stoned or drunk. And he was not rational in the way I thought people should be rational when they buy a company, because it was destroying a lot of value. He defunded and gutted the moderation of Twitter, making it more toxic, more anti-Semitic, more of what it is right now, the apocalypse. He completely fired and destroyed all my team. So like all the open data, all the working with academia, all was killed. And I made a weird prediction. I felt it was like a conspiracy at the time, and I said, he's doing this to get Trump elected. And all my friends told me, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. And to this day, I don't think he initially started with that thought, but I think he turned it into the biggest donation in America history. So like, again, coming back to incentives, look at what drives them, what makes them money, and that's how you understand their actions. And that's my interpretation of X-pocalypse.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you, Chris, John, and Amir for that. We're going to turn this so they can chat amongst themselves about that. But I do want to remind you, we want your questions as well. So don't be shy. Give us your questions. Raise your hand. Get those note cards coming so we can get those questions out here too. So before I start with the questions, do you all have want to riff off of what each of you said or anything? Or
I just want to say how much I respect Moody when he told me that what he did. He basically he created a company. Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. So he created a company.
If you're going to
called,
talk well about me, you can say whatever you want.
He created a company called GNIP, which was basically taking all of Twitter data and normalizing so that users could use the data of Twitter. I think the public conversation, and I think every interaction that we have is a lot better when you have all the data, when you're not just a user, where you can look at the entire conversation. And when my company was bought, it was basically merged into GNIP, into Chris's company. And the company that he built and the value that he added to Twitter before Elon destroyed it was amazing.
Yeah, that was I guess just a quick comment to Amir's Elon story. If you're worried about the chainsaw that's happening in the federal government, I can tell you that the actions at Twitter were not a chainsaw. It was more like a nuclear explosion. So the business I created was generating about $360 million in profit for Twitter annually. And I had left Twitter at that point, but that was the size of the business at the time that you were working there. $360 million in profit, not revenue, in profit is a lot for any company of any size. And he fired every employee in that group without having a conversation with any of them. So he destroyed $360 million in value without having a single conversation. So it's frustrating to see, because I do think there was, in addition to being beneficial to Twitter, I think there was a lot of great insights that the world was benefiting from by people analyzing this data and understanding these conversations. And that a large part of that came to an end without any thought whatsoever. That's all I have to say about that.
And just to make sure we're on the same page from foundational level, can you all share like what public square social media platforms are actually owned by billionaires? Like just so we're not assuming that for the audience here. So.
Well, certainly any publicly traded company, so Facebook, which includes Instagram and WhatsApp and so forth, or that, as John said, those are owned by very large investors plus the founders and Mark Zuckerberg and so forth. You have, and Amir can talk to this. Obviously, you have emerging platforms that are still venture backed. So those people are maybe on their path to being billionaires, but they're not yet, although Blue Sky has some ties to billionaires for sure. But look, there's for successful scaled platforms, people have been able to monetize those nicely and are very wealthy because of it.
There's one interesting thing too. So I'm an investor in Blue Sky. Jay, the founder, is one of the most amazing founders I've ever worked with. And she built a mechanism for Blue Sky to be billionaire proof. And I think like if you meet the Blue Sky team, they're all like 20-year-old internet hippies that understood all the problems that we're talking about and are really deeply thinking about how to solve them. And one of the things that she did is that she created Blue Sky as a B Corp. And if I can geek out a little bit about the corporation structure in the US, Twitter did not have any option not to sell to Elon, because the board would be sued by stakeholders for not doing the right thing. When Elon came and gave the offer, the board was just like a stamp, because if they would say no, they would be sued by the common stock. They had to sell. They had no other option. And every public company that is a C Corp, that is public, is always up for sale, 100% by any billionaire, okay? Jay, smart Jay, turned Blue Sky into a B Corp. B Corp is a company that has a mission, and the board could choose not to adhere to the stakeholders' rights if it's against the mission. So it's mission first, and then the stakeholders of the company. So if a billionaire wants to buy Blue Sky, and I'm the VC, and I tell her you should sell, she doesn't need to listen. And even if she goes public, she doesn't need to do what the public says. So a B Corp, she built mechanism into Blue Sky to protect it from these types of actions.
I would only add, these are not necessarily social platforms, and I don't know the full history of their funding, but two that stand out that are, I think, have always been maybe not-for-profit or very low profit. So Craigslist, Wikipedia, those sorts of sites have some social dynamic, right? They're at least collaborative and are not ad-supported as far as I know. I also know nothing about their backing and who initially funded them, but there is at least a prototype of a model out there that doesn't necessarily have advertising as its primary underlying financial source.
And really quick on that, and I'll dig into the questions here, but going back to Amir, the quote that I had, like, what does it take to win? Like Blue Sky and the scale we're talking about here. Like I cover with my students all the time that meta products are used by 41% of the planet.
Yes.
That's a lot of people.
That is a lot.
And that's a big scale, right? So then when you talk about a company with Blue Sky and the intentions like that, what does winning mean now in this fragmented era that we're in? Like, can a company like that succeed? Can users gain from that? From myself as a practitioner, I started off in community management, where it was the community focus, right? Then over the years, like John was saying, and the incentives changed, and then it became community and marketing all in one place. And we've kind of gotten used to that. And from my perspective, I see fragmented as maybe attempts to split those back out. But can that work from y'all's perspective?
So I think, and this is the core topic of our conversation, I think we need to figure out the monetization of social at scale. Like I think if we go back to the cardinal sin is choosing the easy way to monetize, which like let's put some ads there and that's it. That's how we're going to make money. I think that Jay and the Blue Sky team, at least, is thinking really, really hard about other monetization avenues. And coming back to like, I really like the services that I'm paying for because they continue to delight me. Like, I like my Netflix, I like my Spotify, I like the services that I'm paying for. I think there's alignment of incentives there. Now, will it scale? Will people actually pay at scale for social service? I don't know, but there are other places. So, for example, in China, you use your social app to pay for things. So, like, it becomes the wallet. WeChat, you go and you pay for everything using WeChat. With Instagram, not with Instagram, with WhatsApp, it's the way to communicate to businesses. So in Europe, when you want to book a restaurant, you go into their WhatsApp and you book your restaurant. So there's other ways to monetize, but I think we need to really think about the incentives and what do they create, what type of public squares they create.
I think you also have to think, I think it's a great point. I also think you have to think about scale, and two of us up here I'm a venture capitalist, so I invest in startups. I think you have to think about what success means like in terms of scale. So today, we've traditionally thought about these have to be massive platforms where 40% of the world is on the platform to be successful. And that's frankly how VCs tend to look at things, right? We want huge outcomes, and we're such a raise first, venture first mindset in the startup world that people are thinking, I have to create a company that has, billions of dollars in revenue, and I think it's hard to build a platform from the beginning that's non-advertising based, that has those types of dynamics to it. But there are hundreds of thousands of great businesses that are not of that public scale size that are really great. I was recently pitched by a founder. She had created an incredible social network around LGBTQ plus engagement. And she was out raising money, and like, fantastic platform, incredible engagement. My perspective was really engaging content. And I said to her, I think this is an incredible business. If I were you, I would not raise money from venture capitalists, because the measure of what success becomes is very different once you take money from somebody like me. Now you have to be at a public scale versus, hey, I can just create a great business that generates plenty of profits and I can live a very comfortable life. Heck, I could be very wealthy. But the measure of success has to change. And I personally think, probably doesn't bode well for Amir on his investment in Blue Sky, but I personally think the days of a social network taking over the planet and having, mass adoption is probably over beyond the platforms that we have. And what I think the future likely looks like is more niche platforms that solve, that address very specific communities around very specific topics. I don't think the current platforms are going away, and I think Blue Sky can be very successful, but I think ultimately they will likely find a niche of a community that really resonates with the platform and the type of topics that are happening on that platform.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is I tend to agree with what Chris just said, which is, like, as a non-finance person and looking at this almost like as from a historical lens, it's not clear to me why exactly we need to have social platforms that have this kind of worldwide, ever-growing scale. I mean, if you take the finance out of it, it's not clear how that would be tremendously useful to me as someone who's using the tool to communicate with friends, family, thought leaders, whatever the case might be. There needs to be enough of a common interest that there's like a relevance to what I'm saying and why I'm saying it there, or why I'm hearing it there, or why I'm having the dialogue there. But the kind of millions, or however many millions of people use it worldwide, and how many daily active users there are, I don't know how that's relevant to the user beyond having that initial, forum for interest.
Amir, anything? Here.
I have a lot to say, but I want to have your questions first.
Well, we'll get to questions. Yeah, I like the niches too, except it makes my job a lot harder because then I can't just go to one place to learn. Now I got to go to all these different places. But talking about success and all that, odd question from the audience. Is there any impact with the exodus? Because we do got to talk about these words we're using now with, here it's spelled properly, but headlines with the X-odus, X-pocalypse, of social media users. For example, the volume of people closing accounts and no longer participating. So from your all's perspective, what are the impacts with that?
So I'm happy that every time that happens because everybody's moving to Blue Sky. So it's Blue Sky's data is open, so you can also see how many new users join every day. So every time Elon does something toxic on X, or Mark goes on a video and says that he's moving all the moderation to Texas because he thinks that Texas is a better state to moderate the public conversation, everybody's moving to X. I think the exodus shows. I'm really happy that the exodus is happening because it shows these businesses that what they're doing is wrong, and that at a certain point, hopefully, they'll start losing users if they continue with the toxicity, if they don't take accountability for what they're doing. And I think, and maybe this is a very optimistic point of view, but I think at the end of the day, if users leave, the platforms will do the right thing. They'll go back to trying to be a true public square. So I think the exodus is actually kind of positive.
Yeah, I would say I'm less optimistic because I think it's just I agree it's a good thing. I just think it's the law of large numbers. I don't know if folks will remember, but there was a point in time where there was a big uproar because it became clear what I think everybody in the industry already knew, which was Facebook was selling your private data to anybody that would listen. And I thought, boy, this is the end of Facebook. I mean, they basically admitted it. They paid billions of dollars in fines to the government for doing stuff that was clearly illegal. And it was like, oh, I'm closing my Facebook account. I'm closing my Facebook account. And now what percentage of the population is on a Facebook property? 40-something%. So 4 billion-ish people are still on Facebook. So I do agree that it's great to see people making choices and statements, but I'm not sure it's going to lead to the demise of platforms that maybe you have issues with, because the reality is the numbers of people migrating to these other platforms is still relatively small. So, but I love seeing people act with their wallets and with their intentions.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that maybe I don't know how dependent this is on the actions of whether it's Elon or Zuckerberg. I think there is, and I think there's always the threat that someone sees something that one of those individuals does, gets frustrated, closes their account, moves to another platform. But I think there's a broader underlying issue, right? And I think some of it is related to the ads model, in the sense that the models succeed financially the more time people spend engaged with content on the app or on the site. So that's at the root of it. But I think there's this other dynamic as to why the conversation is sometimes negative or toxic. And I think there's this psychological notion of disinhibition, basically, where you would do something online because there's this wall of either anonymity, or you're not looking someone in the face when you're saying it or doing it, or feeling any of the kind of social consequences you would if you were in an actual physical space like a town square. So I think that dynamic is problematic, and I think you can't pin all of that on Musk or anyone else. I think there are a lot of bad actors in the platforms that frankly are not bad people even. It's just the way you've got this kind of bad combination of two things. The platform itself rewarding things that drive the most attention and engagement, even if it's negative, And that's not, by the way, just Twitter and Facebook. That's very much YouTube and Google and many other platforms that have some version of infinite scroll or some version of a not completely chronological timeline. In other words, they're driving attention to the thing that is the most kind of shocking or attention grabbing. So I don't know. I guess I'm a little more pessimistic on Blue Sky or some other more benevolent version of X being the answer.
Can I add to that? So that's a very interesting point that like we all like to shit on the billionaires, but there's other bad actors out there. One of the things that I try to do at Twitter is to fight the bots. Have you heard about the bots? So the bots is like, because the systems are rigged towards, I will show you the post with the most amount of likes and retweets, there is a lot of incentives from players to get you fake retweets and posts and mentions, right? And the way it works is really, really optimized from a technology point of view. So bear with me, I'm gonna geek out a little bit about the technology, okay? So stay-at-home moms open up Chrome and log in with 100 accounts on their Chrome, and then activate something that gives control for all these accounts to click farms, either in China or in Russia or in something like that. So the user looks like a user in mid-America, and they get about 15 cents or $1 per tab, per logged in tab. And now these farms controls all their actions. So if you want to get 10,000 likes or retweets on your content, you pay $100. Those farms give the order to all these accounts, and all these accounts do exactly what the user has paid for. So there's a secondary market, which is very evil and sinister. It started as not evil and sinister. It's like, hey, I want to promote something, and now I need more clicks and likes. But it became a very sinister aspect of the social network, where you can game the system. Because we've rigged it for engagement, you can buy retweets, you can buy likes, you can buy mentions, and it's very cheap. And it's done with a very simple set of technologies with people who just like want to make a few bucks a day. So there are other things that we need to fix in the system, in the social network, and it's not just the owners.
And by the way, those same bots could be used to say, if you were incented to spread disinformation about something, the exact same technology can be used for that. And so a huge portion of the content you see all the time, if you're on X or some other platform where somebody will make a comment and then somebody will say something that you might view as insane or inflammatory, and then the person engages with that inflammatory comment, or you're crazy, and then this argument breaks out. They're arguing with a bot, right? They're not arguing with a human. And so killing the bots, which I think is whack-a-mole, right? It's an endless task. Twitter's trying to solve that problem for a decade prior to Elon joining. It's not a simple problem to solve. It's kind of ongoing, never ending. There's always new techniques.
And I think one of the things, I see in my role and all that is, often we use the term social media and we think of this thing as just one big thing, but I think what's coming out here is there's lots of layers and nuances and complexities in various places that all either work together or don't work together. And so far we've talked about users, we've talked about the platforms, we've talked about technology, we've talked about the owners, but there's one more part in that layer that we have to talk about, and that's the government and what role they play in there. So I'm going to take a chance and combine 3 questions. You all parse them out as you want, but I think it's an important, the 3 of these here. So while social network algorithms create problems, changing them is a huge challenge. In the meantime, there are basic UX features that have a huge impact on the addictive nature of these platforms, scroll and like and all that. Why can we not first regulate the design features? And again, I pulled this one here because of the term regulate. That could be on the platform, it could be regulate government-wise, so correct me if I'm wrong in that, that are proven to induce these addictive behaviors. And with that, what are your thoughts regarding the repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act? And on top of that, how do you think free speech and misinformation should be handled in big social platforms? So take those however you want, but let's bring government into it a little bit from your perspectives, because I think that's an important aspect that we have to touch on a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the non-government piece, which is I don't think that any of these companies have any incentive to alter their products to create less addiction, if you take that problem as an example. I don't know if folks remember the social platform Tumblr. My last company had a partnership with Tumblr, and I was talking to the head of product, and he said, we can literally see the moment we destroy a teenager's life. We can watch the amount of time they're seeing, and there's some tipping point where they go from they're on Tumblr 5 minutes a day to they're on Tumblr 8 hours a day. And Tumblr, by the way, had tons of toxic content, and this is going back to like 2011, 2012. So I don't think the platforms are going to solve this problem unless they were formed from the very beginning with the notion that they have a different mission and they're monetized differently. But any platform today that it monetizes on advertising, which is pretty much all of them, they have no incentive to self-control. I don't think the government is going to solve this problem. As much as I would like to think they will, I actually think it is going to be people speaking with their wallets and taking their own actions that ultimately is going to solve this problem. I do think there's increasing recognition of some of the problems, and I do think in some cases school systems, communities are starting to speak up and take control. But I'm pretty pessimistic that the government's going to solve this problem because it quickly becomes a political problem, and there's different incentives on both sides of the political aisle. So I'm just not particularly optimistic that the government will solve this.
Yeah, I would agree on that latter point. I think this also gets blurred a bit. You hear a lot, again, back to the First Amendment bit. Really, that applies to the government, right? The government shall not restrict speech, and it's used, unfortunately, by the owners of platforms, people on platforms, people with political agendas to sort of support or oppose different ideas relating to the platforms themselves. So I think there's some degree of like using the First Amendment and the platforms paying lip service to it that is not actual regulation. And I agree with Chris. I don't think there's much incentive to regulate from within the platforms. I don't think that big government action will necessarily help. I do think there are academics out there like Jonathan Haidt at NYU who is highlighting science and data and kind of psychological effects of social media and smartphones and things like that. And that is in turn leading to school districts making different decisions on phones in the classrooms and things like that. So I think there are ways that government can help. I don't think some, EU-like, privacy protections are going to fix this, GDPR or whatever, or the next iteration of it. I think they might help at a small scale, but I think it has to be a combination of better education on the effects of social, of smartphones, et cetera, and the dangers of it, and then kind of coordinated action in communities versus like this large-scale government action.
I usually am the optimistic, but I can't be the optimistic here. I think the organizations, the big networks are not just not incentivized to do anything else, they're incentivized to exactly get you hooked. They spend millions of dollars to get the best psychologist to come in and build hooks to get you addicted to the product. If you want to read the thesis that most of the Silicon Valley is reading, there's a book called Hooked that a psychologist wrote about how to create viral loops in addiction in users. So like you can actually read the manual that we're all following. And we do A/B testing and we see what's hooked. And there's something called the magical moment. So for example, at Twitch, we found out that if you watch a video 7 minutes, you will probably more likely to get hooked. And there's a lot of science behind it. We literally do cohort analysis to see, hey, people who view a video for 7 minutes, they get hooked. So let's get more of those. And we do all the actions to drive people towards that action. So like companies are not incentivized to do that. I think the government won't do anything about it. The first thing is that they don't understand the problem. And they don't understand the technology. And they benefit from the toxicity. And they benefit from the misinformation. So I'm not hopeful about that. What I am starting to be a little bit hopeful is that I'm seeing studies and technologies around self-governance. So if you look at free speech, everybody could say what they want, but it doesn't mean I need to listen. And I think that's a very important aspect of that. So free speech does not mean free reach. And if I could control what I want to say, I've been seeing startups that are looking around like owning my own moderation or delegating my moderation to someone else. So like if I trust Chris and I say, he knows all the toxic people. He'll create a list, a blacklist of all the toxic people that I don't want to listen to. I'll just follow his moderation list. And now we create this network of people helping each other not get toxic content. And I think that is very interesting. Once we delegate that to responsible adults in a community, I have strong belief in communities. Communities tend to help each other. And if we build that moderation and that toxicity filtering into community mechanisms, I think that's the future.
Yeah, and I would say you hit on a really important point, which is it's not just the platforms are kind of thinking of this tipping point for, addiction, for lack of a better word, but you also have this collective action problem. I think that's what it's called, where this relates to, for example, what you were just saying about self-moderation, where if I simplify that analogy in a sense and make it, let's say, smartphones in schools, I, as a parent of young children, could say you're not allowed to have a smartphone in school. That may or may not be effective for some amount of time, but if all the other kids have smartphones in school, you've got this barrier that's almost insurmountable. So it's like without coordinated action and some sort of community level standard, you won't break that sort of cycle of endless addiction.
Totally agree.
I would say whenever I think about these topics, which I spend a lot of time thinking about them, I really do find myself kind of building two categories. There's adults and there's children. And I think the impacts are very, very different. Like as an adult, I'll admit, as much as I have unbelievable frustration with what Twitter became and the fact that Elon owns it and I think has destroyed most of the value of the platform, I'm still a user of X today, but I use it for two things. I use it for sports, and I'm speaking with my wallet in that I don't pay to be a Twitter member, and every ad that's shown to me, you can click and say, I'm not interested in this ad, which I do every time I'm served up an ad. By the way, if you think Twitter's doing well, see what ads are on there, and I can assure you they are not doing well financially because the ads that I'm seeing are something that, like a guy bought. So the days when Procter & Gamble were spending $60 million a year on Twitter, that's not happening now. So I use it for sports, and when occasionally somebody that I follow in sports will say something political, and then I just unfollow them because that's not what I'm using the platform for. And then I use it for weather alerts when we have the occasional fire in Boulder. I get on and I see what's the latest because I find it's the fastest way to get the most recent information. As adults, we get to make those choices. And not all adults make good choices, as we know. I think the part that I hope there will be local regulation around. Again, I don't think the federal government's going to solve this problem, but I hope at the local level we'll see more regulation, especially again in the school districts about kids and their use of platforms during the day. It is interesting as a parent of three. I see my kids intellectually; they know what is right and wrong, but but there's a difference between addiction and awareness, and it's not an awareness problem.
And going with, what we all can do in this, we've kind of covered this, but it's a really important point, so I want to make sure we cover it again, and it's from a student. So Chris suggested the idea of speak with your wallet, what you talked about, but it's complex. How can users do this when it often feels like we're the product data rather than the consumer advertisers, right? So it's a very hard thing to do, even though it's easy to say. Any tips for the audience on how?
Again, I just think it starts with awareness. If you're comfortable with Facebook selling your private data, then by all means continue to use the platform. Just being aware that that's what's happening. If you're engaging in arguments on Twitter, recognize that you're being manipulated by algorithms and by bots to have those arguments. And so you have to, I think it starts with awareness. Like if you're aware of it, then you can make choices based on awareness. I think there's a lack of awareness oftentimes with people understanding how these platforms work. So I can use Twitter in a way that I know is not helpful to Elon, and yet I still get the benefit from it. And so I think we can do a better job of certainly of awareness more broadly. Like, it was completely incredulous to me that when Facebook admitted they were selling people's private data, and they were fined by the government, they didn't fight it. I mean, they tried to hide it, but once it was out, they didn't fight it. And I thought, well, this is the end. I think most people, at first I thought, well, everybody knows this, but the reality was everybody in my circle who lived in that world knew about it. I don't think the broad public was actually paying that much attention to it. And so I do think it starts with awareness, and then awareness can lead to better actions.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm not a good like barometer or whatever for this. I think I don't and have not for a really long time used any social platforms other than LinkedIn. I'm not that big into like sports or pop culture or anything, so that makes it easier. I'm a hit at parties, I can assure you of that. But so for me, it's also like, I think if anything, there is this habitual nature of using like a smartphone more than anything else because it's in your pocket and it buzzes or rings or kind of keeps drawing you in. So I think my best advice would be like being aware, like Chris said, and also like consciously like taking a break from that in some form or another. I don't know, leave the phone at home and go outside, or turn it off for a certain amount of hours a day if you can. Obviously, you need to be reachable, maybe from emergencies or something. But yeah, I think being conscious and taking like conscious steps that are not just like paying lip service to, yeah, I'm going to use Meta less or whatever because they're selling my information, but I'm going to distance myself from the device that makes this inevitable.
So I'm completely hooked on all the social networks that I had. The only one that I actually kicked was TikTok, because one day I just opened TikTok and 5 hours passed of my life just like that, and I decided that's not a habit that I want to build. But I'm like very, very social. I spent, I guess, 4 or 5 hours on social. But my hope is my kid here is here in the front row. And I think that's my hope. The hope is to educate the new generation, and I think that I'm seeing patterns with them that are slightly better. Like I think that we're like my generation. We're all about like taking photos and sharing and stuff like that, and I think they're slightly optimizing for in-person experiences more. And if you go and walk around the university, you see them like lying on the grass and just hanging there, and not a lot of them are always with their phones, and that gives me a little bit of hope. So like I think educating people, especially kids, about like how much data is being used, and to your point, like how it's been abused, and educating the new generation about how to be responsible. That's the key for the future.
I do love your optimism, Amir. I always had this theory, which has proven not to be true, at least yet, which was like, I think about my parents' generation, like most of my father, most of my parents' friends smoked. And there was awareness in the 70s that smoking was not good for you, but that's what adults did. They smoked. And then my generation, most people said, well, why would you do that? It's dangerous. And also that's what like older people do. That's not cool. You just revolt against what your parents did to a certain extent at some point. And so, so now we have a generation of kids whose parents have been addicted to social media and are on their phones all the time. And I've been optimistic that the next generation is going to go, that is so lame. Like all my parents did was sit around and be on their phone. I haven't seen that transition with my own kids yet, but I do have some optimism that will eventually happen, that people will look up and say, we're going to do things differently, and hopefully that transition will happen. I do think there is some recognition of it, but I haven't seen it happen in mass yet.
Awesome answers. We got 5 minutes left here, so how do we land this plane? A lot of great questions. I think we've covered a lot of the topics on these around data and all that. Then time for closing arguments, but I'm going to present a good question here because there's one other topic we didn't talk about. So in the 1 minute y'all have, AI. Another big bucket of things and related to this conversation. But I like the way this conversation was framed because we've been talking a lot about incentives and finance and all. How will the widespread adoption, implementation of AI impact the revenue model of social media, which then impacts things like data, awareness, incentives, algorithms, and so on and so forth. But if you want to take that or just close out, I don't know, roughly a minute each, and then we'll call it.
Amir, this is probably your...
Okay. AI is not a single thing. AI is a tool, or more like a tool set. So I think that AI will be used both for good and for bad. I think the bad things that we'll see from AI is a lot more fake content. And what you're seeing right now, the movies of Trump dancing or something like that, that's just the beginning. In 5 years, we're gonna have content that is completely indistinguishable from reality. And so you're gonna see every person doing everything and anything just by prompting that. And you can have Obama supporting Trump, and you can have Trump supporting whatever good thing that he's not supporting right now. So AI will, there's gonna be a lot of content that is gonna be bombarded in the network. But AI could also discern from information and disinformation. AI could be a way to fight bots. AI could be used for moderation. AI could be used for curation of good content. So if I'm interested in authors, I could tell, hey AI, I want you to curate my following list for my best authors. I like Dan Brown, I like this, and find people like that. So you see that a lot in Spotify, where you like one song and Spotify knows how to curate that. So I think AI will be used for good and for bad. It will just make the things that socials are either better or worse, and I don't know which direction it's going to take.
All right, we got 3 minutes, so I know a tough topic. But.
No, all good. Just to add a couple of things. I think the scariest thing is what Amir touched on, which is I think it's going to be impossible to know what's real, and that's the thing that concerns me the most. I'll share with you just a very quick story. I'm an investor and on the board of a large consumer company, and the CEO of this company has a very public persona. His image and his voice are all over the internet, and it turns out if you have enough data samples of somebody's voice, it's very easy to recreate their voice through AI. The CFO of his company and other executives started getting calls from the CEO saying, hey, please wire money. We need to make this payment. Please wire money to this account. The only thing that was obvious to these people that it was fake was that he said, hey, this is, and he said his name. And they were like, he would never call me and then say what his name is, right? That's just not. But that was the tip-off, right? It didn't sound like him. And so, that's obviously a targeted phishing campaign. But when you think about content and this person just said this, we've seen hints of that, but I think the sophistication around that, it's pretty terrifying from that perspective. But I also agree there's so much good that's going to come out of AI, and in terms of also fighting this. So I think it's a very mixed bag. But I'd say from a social platform perspective, I probably have a lot more pessimism than I have optimism, because I think it's going to highlight all the, not that this room needed more anxiety, but all the anxiety we talked about, I think mostly gets amplified through AI.
John, you want 30 seconds?
Yes, I'm a big proponent of AI. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, and that is coming from someone who does not use social platforms or smartphones all that much. I think I'm on the other end of the spectrum with AI as a tool for research and things like that. I think it's a natural extension. What Chris and Amir said, it will make truth completely relative in a sense, at least on social media. It'll be impossible to tell what's real and what's fake. And I think the key is, like, we cannot look at social media or any of these things like some mirror of real society, right? It's a fun house. Everything is distorted, and it's going to get more and more distorted. And I think as long as you have the right perspective and can kind of tune that out and see reality for what it is and social for what it is and isn't, then that's the way to go.
Awesome. We're all going to go get on our bikes and unwind from this complex topic we talked about, but thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our session's time here. Let's give Amir, Chris, and John a round of applause. And thank you very much to everyone who attended live and everyone who attended via live stream. This panel is now concluded. Have a great rest of your day.